I was learning through my patient care that I didn't have tools to handle obesity. One of my patients looked at me once and said, doctors become doctors to either prescribe medicines or to do operations. I created my own job and I'm blissfully happy because for the most part, people get better. Rheumatology 25 years ago, you couldn't fix anything. Neurology was pretty cool and you could diagnose things. You couldn't fix anything. A third of the people I thought I was going to operate on, just lighter in weight, they didn't need the operation anymore. They want to take a pill or when really what we're doing is take away the noxious, toxic environment sort of additives. But then again, you wouldn't put dirty gas in your car. Imagine that you just had a huge holiday meal. So what do you want to do after a huge holiday meal? And they go, nothing.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly. Get going here. Well, anyway, so Dr. Eric Westman, it is wonderful to talk to you. We've known each other for a number of years now. You've been a pioneer in the low-carb ketogenic space and now carnivore space and have just tremendous insight with the breadth of many, many years experience in as a physician treating this. And so honored to have you here. For those that don't know who you are, would you just give us a little 2-minute description of your background?
Sure. Well, I'm a physician. I'm not a surgeon. I'm a medical doctor. Internal medicine was my first specialty. And, I guess in short, I started as an undergrad at Stanford University and went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for medical school, and then the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky, and then Duke. Since 1990, I've been at Duke and got a master's in biometry and did a fellowship in general internal medicine at Duke. And general internists are kind of known as the teachers for internal medicine residents. And then I went out to get a second specialty in obesity medicine. And as a subgroup or subcomponent of obesity medicine, I'm now practicing in a clinic called a keto medicine clinic at Duke University. So, when I meet new people, I ask, well, where are you from? What do you do? And I think it's important to know that, but, we can always learn as we go. I didn't get much nutrition training in all of that education and had to do a lot of training on my own, I think like you have too. But some have argued that I followed basketball teams around. It's not true. They weren't so good back then. And now don't ask me. In fact, I'd like to know why Stanford and Cal are now in the Athletic Coast Conference, if somebody knows why that happened. So anyway, I don't think Wisconsin will join the ACC, but you never know.
Yeah, it's interesting. You had a geographic west to east shift. I was listening to that, and I was like, you just kept moving farther and farther east. One interesting thing, and I didn't know those things about you. So I'm glad because I was associated with Duke. But obesity medicine, I don't know when you took that up, but I suspect you took it up many years ago, probably before there was many obese people. Now it's become a more sort of popular specialty just out of necessity because we do have so many obese people. But what compelled you to do that back when you did that?
Yeah, so, gosh, this is going back to the late 90s. And in my internal medicine practice at a Veterans Affairs hospital, it was called ambulatory care. That's still called ambulatory care today. But so I was learning through my patient care that I didn't have tools to handle obesity. And it was less common then. And then a couple of my patients did the Atkins induction diet, read the books, and I was curious and followed that. So that's how I got into this. I basically had 2 patients do the Atkins diet, and I got curious and wanted to assemble that knowledge. But by the time I got into obesity medicine, around 2010, 2012, the phentermine was the only medicine that was available. And so I taught keto diets at the Obesity Medicine Organization, and most were using phentermine at the time. And now in the last 5 years, it's exploded with all the different shots. And one of my patients looked at me once and said, doctors become doctors to either prescribe medicines or to do operations. they didn't become a doctor to talk about food. So I finally realized, okay, that explains why the Obesity Medicine Association today basically is now working with the new drugs. They always were using drugs too, but it's getting away from diet because of the ease of use, I think, of the medications. Not that they're any better, or they certainly have more side effects and are more expensive than just changing the food. But I got to learn, from a lot of doctors. I get in an organization, yes, to learn about the content, but also it's to go to compare notes with other doctors who are doing similar things. And I learned how to measure the waistline very, very slickly, and how to coach and tell people that, to support them along the way, because most other doctors are telling them just to, go lose weight and come back. And so I have to say, I created my own job, and I'm blissfully happy because for the most part, people get better. If someone does this, it's going to work. So kind of like the confidence of a pill. If a pill has been vetted through the system, it's going to work. And that's what we use. We use a diet that is as certain as a pill. It'll work if you do it.
Yeah, two comments on that. One is, I think people go to physicians and surgeons for drugs and surgery because they're the only ones allowed to do it. I can get nutrition advice from my grandmother, so it's kind of one of those things. But, again, there's some level of expertise that goes with that. And you got somebody who's just kind of casually off the cuff. Grandma tells you, eat your vegetables. That is a lot different than someone who's dealing with someone going through a disease process. And the other thing is that you didn't mention this, and I don't know if it's true, but many physicians, myself included, did not get an interest in nutrition unless we had our own personal issue. And I just, in my 40s, felt like I just wasn't where I wanted to be health-wise. So I had to make my own journey before I was, I guess, excited enough to start talking about my other people. It doesn't sound like, I don't know, were you ever the big kind of overweight guy? I've not heard that in your background.
No, and I was, the third boy of three boys, and I was the chubby one. My other brothers went out, and one played college basketball and then semi-pro in Europe, and he was the natural exerciser. And I think looking back, that's important. If you gravitate towards sports, you're metabolically flexible. That's a different kind of metabolism than like me. I was sitting at the piano doing lessons that I didn't want to do while everyone else was out playing. So whether that was enforced environmentally, no, I think it was also my natural predilection. I would rather be reading the books than dribbling the basketball like my brother. So no, I didn't have to. I maybe had 30 pounds of extra weight over my high school weight, having done the rubber chicken circuit as a doctor speaking on behalf of the smoking cessation companies. So I got a taste of what Pharma does and what asks doctors to do in the smoking cessation world. That was my first 10 years of clinical research. And then I switched to the weight loss and largely low-carb diet world for research and clinical care.
Now, obviously, you got maybe an interest in obesity, but I'm sure you've seen what I've seen is that diet doesn't just impact obesity. I mean, I can't even count the number of medical conditions that are dramatically impacted by diet. Is that what you've seen? And if so, what are some of the things you've seen over the years?
Yeah, so kind of perhaps like your interest, as you get into it, you learn more and more, and people will tell you their stories. And so when I got into this, I started studying obesity. It was what everyone was using an Atkins diet for. But then I got wind, I visited Dr. Atkins, and I never really learned from him. By the time our second study was coming out, he slipped on the ice in New York City and died. But I got to work with his nurse for the next 20 years to kind of relearn the nuance of personalization of this approach. And then I went back to one of the books that Dr. Atkins wrote called The Dr. Atkins Health Revolution. It's this kind of obscure book. You probably get it for $1 now at a used bookstore. But he actually chronicled every other medical condition that he saw in his practice. And I used that as my initial roadmap for, okay, I did a study on obesity, what's next? Type 2 diabetes, what's next? Polycystic ovary syndrome, what's next? Heartburn reversal, and all these other inflammatory things. Dr. Atkins had written about them. Of course, it doesn't count in the academic world. So we started doing proof of concept studies of fatty liver. I had a friend who did the liver biopsies locally and showed reversal of fatty liver by liver biopsy. That was 2007, I believe, our paper. So by that time, I opened a clinic. And you have to understand also the general internists, maybe like general surgeons. I don't fully understand the surgical world, but general internists, we kind of feel like we can take on anything. Like, we were trained in pulmonary a little bit and heart and cardiology, trained in nephrology. And so I started to kind of let anyone come to see me in an office practice. And it's staying in a university, I didn't have to worry that much about feeding all of the mouths of a company, of growing it like that. So I started seeing the diabetes reversal and hypertension reversal and high blood pressure reversal and heartburn going away and joint pain going away, all in the same person. I mean, talk about empowerment as a doctor. I mean, these were the conditions that I kind of looked at a distance and said, rheumatology 25 years ago, you couldn't fix anything. Neurology was pretty cool and you could diagnose it. You couldn't fix anything. And so I finally got into, like a kid in a candy store, a method. Of course, it meant I had to talk about food, which is unusual for a doctor, but a method that actually allows me to fix, not just manage, but reverse all of these medical issues. And then an orthopedic surgeon visited me and said I set up a practice next to my surgical practice. And it's amazing. A third of the people I thought I was going to operate on, just lighter in weight, they didn't need the operation anymore. And so, gosh, now I'm getting into rheumatology and arthritis, but it all comes down to food, doesn't it? Once you get that in order, it's like I'm just letting the body heal itself, getting the food out of the way. And yet that's something that seems weird, not only to doctors, but to a lot of people. They want to take a pill or when really what we're doing is taking away the noxious, toxic environment sort of additives. But then again, you wouldn't put dirty gas in your car. I mean, we can't. You could make a mistake and put the wrong type of gas in the car, but why do we just forget about that with humans and especially doctors? I mean, I thought doctors would get some training on what to put in the body. It's like the medical academic world doesn't even acknowledge that food matters, except if you do a Mediterranean diet, then suddenly everyone loses their brain and says, "Oh, well, that's good."
The analogy between trying to stick a diesel into a gas powered car and the nozzles don't fit. Maybe as humans we should have mouths that don't accept the garbage we're feeding ourselves. That would be interesting. One thing you said is you're seeing all these various conditions, arthritis, reflux, and there's a drug for everyone, an individual drug for every one of those conditions, and yet one intervention takes care of all of these, and it's cheap basically. It's it's almost free because you got to eat something anyway. But I want to, you touched on this in the beginning, some of the new obesity drugs that have come out, particularly the GLP-1 receptor agonists, have gotten so much press, and they're selling a lot of those. And I see it's interesting as I watch the engagement, and a lot of physicians are talking about, I had a person on a GLP-1 and it made him quit, want to quit smoking. And they're talking about all these sort of side benefits, the things that you and I have both seen in nutrition. I mean, I see people that go, keto carnivore, and they're like, I don't want to drink anymore. That's happening pretty regularly, but they're easily talking about funding studies for it. We're going to do studies on this. And it's like instantly, if they see there's another indication, I'm going to fund a study to sell their product. And yet the nutrition research is so hard to get funded. I'm sure you've seen that over the years trying to do these studies. Can you relate to that experience?
Yeah, and so we actually approached Dr. Atkins for research money, and then they created the Atkins Foundation, and then that money dried up. And, it's taken 20 years, but the NIH now is funding low carb science. It's just not very many studies, but there are some investigators who started as K awards, meaning it's a junior investigator award through NIH. So finally, hopefully that's going to come around. But the research for drugs, there was have you seen the movie First Do No Farm with Asim Malhotra yet? I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I watched this movie. Yeah, it's a good movie.
In there, not farm like F-A-R-M, but farm, P-H-A-R-M. And he, in there, interviewed one of the former editors of the British Medical Journal. And she was known to kind of be a stickler for data and transparency and even diet. And Dr. Godley says, we've asked the statin drug companies to be open about their data, to let us look in and see. I mean, if it's working, they would love other people to look in to see how great it works, right? But she also commented that through all the years, the drug companies could have added on a dietary arm, or could have added another sort of. I mean, there's so much money to study this. It was the purpose of the company to show that the drug was better than placebo. It wasn't that they were interested in human health necessarily, which is a chilling commentary, although it may be obvious to everyone else watching. It's not always obvious to those in the trenches who kind of really believe that, in principle, medical people want to help other people, but the doctors. But when you get a company in that really clearly doesn't care, they just want to sell their drug, we could now insist, somehow the royal we, that any new drug being introduced doesn't have to just be compared against placebo. But if there's a viable lifestyle option, carnivore, keto, Mediterranean, I don't care, even vegan. I mean, you choose a diet or add in some other non-drug, non-standard American diet sort of approach as a requirement. It wouldn't cost them that much. And then we'd also learn about non-drug things. But, currently, I'm not aware of any requirement that a drug company has to do anything other than prove that their drug is safe and effective beyond placebo. But having money to do research, when you look at it now, yes, the GLP ones and the second generation ones affect all these different things, but so does a keto diet and a carnivore diet, but they're not going to talk about that also doing it, right? But I just step back. If you've never tried one of these medicines, imagine that you just had a huge holiday meal, That's what these drugs are doing. They're sending out, amplifying the signal that you're full. So what do you want to do after a huge holiday meal? And I ask people this and they go, nothing. That's right. So a major side effect of these is they're too good. And so you don't want to go out and have fun anymore. You don't want to, so when you're messing with Mother Nature, so to speak, all these unintended consequences can happen when you and I know just changing the food does the same thing. But unless a study is done in the medical world, in the PubMed, Medline searching engine, other doctors and policymakers won't believe it.
Well, as you know, those GLP-1 receptor agonists, they mimic the GLP-1, the actual hormone, and they stick around for a long time. So if you have surgery and you're on one of these drugs, you have to be off that drug for like a month because your gut has been slowed because the half-life is so long. And so you have this, this incretin, gastric inhibitory effect going on so much longer than it's supposed to happen. And I don't know if you see like patients that are on the drugs that come to you still. I don't know how active your practice is, if they're having some issues or not. The thing that really sort of shocked me is, you hear these people saying anecdotally, well, we've had a lot of issues. I have ER physicians telling me they're seeing countless patients coming in with intractable vomiting, things like that, intestinal obstructions. And yet I guess the post-secondary, once it's on the market, it's supposed to be surveilled and reported something called MedWatch, which I didn't even know existed as a physician. It's kind of a sad commentary. And I asked these emergency physicians, are they reporting these side effects to whoever, the government? And they're like, no, we don't really report it because they don't even know how to do it. And my understanding is less than 1% of drug side effects are ever even captured, even serious adverse effects where people die and get really sick. That, so it may take 10 years to recognize some of these signals. I don't know what you're seeing.
Well, I would work in a, Raleigh-Durham area, metropolitan area, maybe 1.5 million. It's not a huge area, but most other doctors are using these medicines now and the shots. And then they suddenly have become an expert on weight loss. Not that they've learned and become an obesity medicine expert.
They become lifestyle medicine experts because they can give a shot now.
Well, that's right. So, they can prescribe the shot, but most of the time, doctors don't know what to say in terms of what to eat, and this is where most obesity medicine doctors are a little we're going a little crazy, because there is a safe use of medicine to ensure that people are using the food wisely. If you eat protein. You're not just having Skittles or candy all day long, which some people, if they're not told, they might have fruit all day long. And then, so there are a couple, just kind of looking as an outsider. I wasn't involved in drug development for these shots, although I am a critic of drug development and have been in that world. A third of the people dropped out of the clinical trials in the best hands because of GI side effects. The nausea, the vomiting, the stomach pain. And in my experience, going back 30 years in drug trials, that would be too high. I mean, you wouldn't bring a drug to market if a third of the people dropped out, right? Well, it's happened. So there's such a massive popularity. On the upside, the 2/3 who don't have side effects do fine. But we can't know who that's going to be until you try it. There's no predictive tool. So, but if you can imagine now, you have 1 million people on these medicines and a third of them have such bad nausea that they drop out and go into the ER and all. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people now negatively affected by these medicines that went through proper FDA approval. And so that was kind of a strange observation of just watching this develop. The other thing is the muscle loss. They did not really require a maintenance of muscle mass in these studies. It wasn't part of the FDA evaluation. It's not part of the weight loss surgery evaluation. And my weight loss surgery colleagues say, well, they lost some muscle mass, but they're still alive. And there is a role for weight loss surgery that's in the whole obesity medicine scheme of things. But now, not to worry, the pharma, the development is we're going to add a medicine into the medicine so that it spares your muscle mass. So, it is hubris, if you will, like, the Icarus flying to the sun and then the wax on the wings melt. The power of these drugs is pretty awesome. And so on the one hand, I see some people who it's a godsend for the medicines, and even the surgery at an extreme level. And yet some people now are getting into this weight loss shot world without any knowledge about nutrition. And so someone comes to me, oh, I can't believe, I'm losing weight, but I'm sick on the shot. And I just explain, well, there are other ways to do it. And often the response is, really? I mean, my doctor didn't mention a carnivore diet or a low-carb or keto diet. They just said, here's a drug. So, but the conversation 20 years ago was, my doctor just said, have weight loss surgery. And so now we have inserted the medicine as a way for doctors to get involved when you don't even need the doctor if you're going to do it without the shots and the surgeries. But on balance, I hope more people will be helped than harmed. And if you're on one of these medicines and you're not tolerating it, there are other ways to do it. And if you're watching a family member who's gotten into that area and they're not feeling well, I mean, gosh, let them know, if you haven't already, how you've done it yourself by not using a shot or a surgery.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly. Now, you've been obviously in the low-carb game for a long number of years. I don't know if you have patients with long-term follow-up, and if you do, are they disproportionately succumbing to heart disease and some of these other things that we're warned about? You know, are they? What has been your experience on the long-term people that have done this 10, 20 years?
Yeah, so I don't see an epidemic of heart disease in my patients, yet I haven't formally had them in a log or a registry, which is a regret. I wish I would have just bit the bullet. But unfortunately, the medical world, even 15 years ago, I spent all my time documenting. And do you remember those days? I mean, you would work all day long, and then you'd take your charts home, and you'd
3 hours of documenting. Yeah.
How can I do a registry as well? So when I had a little bit of research funding, we kind of got wrapped around making our own spreadsheet and access database. That's going back a while. But I never did keep people formally, but I've followed people with heart disease now for 20 years where they have not had a redo bypass surgery. They've not had other catheterizations and heart attacks. And it's to that point now where I'm getting some volunteers. This is the third year medical students who have to do some sort of project, for example, at Duke. And one of them this year did assemble all of the heart failure patients that we could find by hand through our charts, and then also searching the Epic software that we use. And it was actually presented at a American Heart Association meeting, American College of Cardiology meeting. And there's actually an interest now in ketones, drinking ketones, hopefully the keto diet too, for heart failure. And that story came from the SGLT2 inhibitors, but there's a now kind of an opening into cardiology. Those who are treating heart failure kind of are waking up to the idea that these medicines that reduce heart failure recurrence actually worked by inducing ketosis. So the cardiologists, it's so ironic, or not, I don't know the right word, that the organization that is probably the worst against eating fat, the heart doctors don't eat fat, saturated fat is bad, are now learning that keto actually prevents recurrent heart attacks. And the reason is through a drug that induced a side effect of ketosis, often ketoacidosis, which I'm not a big fan of those drugs. But so now there's this awkward position of, well, they're not talking about keto diets, they're talking about keto drinks and keto pills. But so I don't know how they're going to reconcile the idea that actually not only is eating fat and keto not bad for you, it helps heart failure. And I have several anecdotes of the ejection fraction going from 20% to 50%. Okay, with weight loss along the way. I mean, but that counts, right? So it's just kind of interesting to see how the cardiology world learned about metabolism through a drug. I mean, it's kind of fitting because really all they are working with is drugs. And in a paper, it's on my wall at work, in 2020, with modern techniques, all of the nutrients were looked at in the heart muscle of what the heart used. And it uses fat. The heart muscle uses fatty acids. And of course, I knew this 30 years ago when I started to get into this. I would ask the department chair in medicine who used to use Petri dishes and look at heart muscle. He knew that fatty acid is what the heart muscle preferred. But in this paper, even in the abstract, the writer says, we were surprised to find very little glucose was used. And, don't ever write a paper that acknowledges your ignorance in the abstract. I mean, the heart always knew it was using fatty acids. It's just the medical mainstream lost its mind and thought saturated fat was bad. But this is really, an internist's dream to come up with a diet or lifestyle approach, something other than exercise. And I have to say, tell me if I'm ranting a little too much on a sidebar, but so I came to Duke as a young doctor and I got interested in clinical trials, got a master's in biometry. And during my first years here, the lead of the cardiovascular prevention program died. He wasn't all that old, but he died while he was exercising. And so the idea of just exercising as a tool, which is really all the cardiologists had back then, and even a lot of them now, we know that that's not right for everyone. And now I deal with people who are unable to exercise. So I'm hoping that the new science that's being generated, even if it's being learned through a drug side effect, will open the idea that to internists, cardiologists who are a subset of internists, that you can accomplish so much by changing the food. And yes, it's cutting out sugars and starches and junk foods and ultra-processed foods and gluten and all of these other things that get eliminated on the diets that we teach. But so I kind of knew that exercise and low-fat diets weren't for everyone, but it was through my patients and then through doctors who taught me through the obesity medicine world how to fine-tune the kind of practice that I'm in today. And yes, there are some on SGLT2 inhibitors and now the second generation ones, but I still try to steer them back, especially at the end of your weight loss journey. What are you going to do? Are you going to go back to food or like the drug companies want you to just stay on the shop forever? That's the hidden agenda that they've already laid the groundwork with these randomized trials of after you've lost a certain amount, let's randomize people to placebo or a real shot. And if you're put on a placebo shot, you regain the weight, which is kind of leading to we'll just keep you on the shot forever, which is really, I can't believe people will go along with that, except doctors go along with that. And people trust their doctors. That's above a certain age, people still trust their doctors, which is kind of reassuring yet scary at the same time.
Yeah, the fact that you've got to be on it. Yeah, I mean, and the marketing strategy and design of this drug is, yes, you're going to be on it for the rest of your life. That's the only way they're going to bring it to market. They don't want a one-shot cures you and then you're done, unless they charge you $1 million for the shot. I would say there are some thoughts around that, around some of the genetic drugs that might come out later. But the SGLT2 inhibitors, they lower your glucose. They make you pee it all off, but they also raise your cholesterol, which is another side effect. And yet the cardiovascular outcomes in those drugs are generally positive. And it's like, well, my cholesterol is going up, my glucose is going down, but my heart disease risk has gone down. That's a big sort of red flag that people seem to ignore, as well as a state of ketosis in there. I think that's quite interesting. One of the things we kind of touched upon when you interviewed me the other day was the fact that we see people on low-carb diets, keto diets, carnivore diets, whose labs may not necessarily line up with what we think is supposed to be normal or healthy. I wonder if we could touch on some of those things, some of the things you've seen over your career with regard to cholesterol, glucose, thyroid, whatever. There's a lot of things, I think, folate, things like that.
But, I keep reminding people I'm not an early adopter. I'm actually kind of a reactive and kind of conservative in my views. And it didn't occur to me till, years into this that hopefully won't take that long for most other people, but that the laboratory normal range is based on, humans in our area, largely Americans, who go in for their blood draws and they put up kind of a bell-shaped curve for most things, although it might be very tight. It might have a tail like this, but it's those who eat carbs. And I bet if in studies that used to be done following people over time, if you said you ate no carbs or your cholesterol was over a certain number, they probably threw it out as an outlier because it was so uncommon. But so when people started getting ketones in the blood checked and kind of acknowledged, well, that's okay. You're on a keto diet. It still says abnormal on the lab, but it's just that it's not seen in those who eat carbs. And so then when the cholesterol levels started coming, abnormal or not in the normal optimal range, that kind of has taken some doctors by, almost storm that this is necessarily bad because, cholesterol is so important. And really, I don't believe that anymore based on studies that actually show diabetes and metabolic syndrome are more important side by side to cholesterol in prediction of, that's the papers looking in women over 28 years. It's really the glucose domain that is most important to fix that. So if your doctor isn't fixing your diabetes and they're obsessing about a cholesterol level, this isn't the right focus in my mind. And so then some people now, with the advent of biohacking and home monitoring of glucose and ketones, and are now coming in, saying, why isn't my blood glucose between 80 and 100 all day long? And I'm reminded of when we first had blood pressure cuffs. There were these cuffs you could called ambulatory monitors. You send people home with them, and every 5 minutes it took the blood pressure all day long, and it goes up and down, your blood pressure. So I think what we're seeing is some people over concerned about what are normal biologic variations in terms of blood glucose, in terms of blood ketones. But then I think, in fact, it was your hemoglobin A1C that hit the internet as not totally normal, when by all indicators you're not eating many carbs at all. And how could you have an elevated A1C? Well, that gets into the idea that the test is complicated. The test relies on the red blood cell mass, the blood glucose levels, both those combined, probably some other factors that we don't know about. But then the idea that ferritin levels might be elevated, and then the false correlation of elevated ferritin, elevated A1C, all of the elevated cholesterol, with false correlation of these must have the same relationship among those who don't eat carbs as those who do eat carbs is something that finally, over the last few years, it's relatively recent for me. I'm kind of, let's disentangle this a bit, and that A1C was elevated while people were eating 300 grams of carbs a day. That ferritin level, if it was elevated in hemochromatosis, was elevated when people weren't eating much red meat. So I think we have a false rapid trigger finger, if you will, of saying that this is abnormal and bad, when really it's just a different metabolism, a different context. And I think we need to pause and collect the information and follow people over time, rather than say, see, it's bad, get off that, which I think has changed. I mean, I think they're more in large part to doctors like you who are talking about this. And I think there is a more acceptance today than there was, say, 5 years ago. If someone had a elevated blood level or low blood level compared to carb eaters, people aren't, even doctors in my area are a little more tolerant of it. But I teach until I'm blue in the face about metabolic syndrome, where we look at triglyceride and HDL in the blood, not the total in LDL. And so I'm trying to just frame it as it's a new technology. It's like using a cell phone now with a camera on it, as opposed to one with a cord. It doesn't work the same way. Or driving on the left-hand side of the road compared to the right-hand side of the road. It's just things are done differently, but it can work. And so we're in that period of time, though, where data should be, hopefully we're collecting this information, and studies should be funded, I really believe, because of the benefits that are seen in the short term, let's say even short-term carnivore improvements. We have to be studying this to see if there are any side effects or even long-term issues with it, because it's so good, so fast for many people.
Yeah, I mean, and I think many people have pointed this out. It's the lab value has some relevance, but why that lab value is altered is also extremely important. And sometimes, like for instance, inflammation we generally associate with bad things, but eating causes inflammation, exercise causes inflammation, and so those are things that generally are considered healthy. And so we have to sort of distance ourselves from, you, like you said, this knee jerk. Oh my gosh, your cholesterol is a little high. Let's make you eat. You need to go back to eating, cardboard, low fat cardboard, and put you on all these drugs. When in fact, it may not actually be a problem in this particular situation. I think we've been kind of lost in treating population averages. And again, as you mentioned, all those reference ranges were obtained in, grain-based, carb-based societies, and we're like, I don't know if I match that description anymore. And so I think it's something that is tough for people to get disentangled, because they think if they take some blood, it'll tell them everything they need to know about their body. And I'm like, well, that stuff is pretty dynamic and it changes every hour and every day. And I mean, like I said, if you just got done doing a hard workout and took a blood draw and your blood glucose came back at 182 milligrams per day, you'd say, oh my God, I'm diabetic. Well, no, maybe you just did some intense exercise. I mean, we have to, I don't know if I get a lot of people on social media, they'll send me their labs and they'll say, hey, Dr. Baker, what do you think about this one little lipid panel? I'm like, I literally don't know. I need more information. I know people don't like to think about the context, and that's one of the arts of medicine, I think. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And even now, I don't use the cholesterol level to help manage cardiovascular risk. I'll talk about the calcium score. I'll talk about getting ultrasounds on your own outside the medical system so that you can know how your arteries are. And yet, if you're not using your heart arteries much, you're relatively sedentary, you could probably have blockages and you'll be just fine. That won't be the cause of your demise over time. And that is so much a personalized conversation with a coach or a doctor who understands that there's more than just the blood test. I'm reminded of Steve Finney, who said, we check the blood because it's convenient. Mm-hmm. Not that it really all matters that much. And then he made the very interesting metaphor of it's kind of like I think he said this to me, if not, sorry, Steve, but he said that our blood is really kind of like a medieval street where people are living there and they're throwing out their waste into the street. And then other people are carrying bread and food around in the street, because it's our blood is basically the sewer and the carrier of nutrients and food. And it's all got to coexist there. And because it's a circulatory system, you never really know where it's going. I mean, unless you study, the flux, the change. So I think the new awareness of how cholesterol can be used, for example, the lipid energy hypothesis that Dave Feldman came up with is fascinating. I don't think it's going to be perfect, but it's at least it's saying that the cholesterol levels can be higher. And it makes sense why. That it's not that it's going to cause heart disease. It's just a different kind of metabolism. And I do, value the blood work, of course, but in a different way. I look at metabolic syndrome. But kind of when I got into comparative physiology and comparative anatomy, when you look at other animals, I've heard people argue that we're supposed to be, vegetarian because of the certain teeth. We're supposed to be that. I'm more persuaded by our stomach and intestinal anatomy. If you lined up the anatomy internally of a human, it really lines up with a carnivore. And to me, that's again, I'm an internist. I don't care so much about what's on the plate. I want to know what's going on internally to your metabolism and your hormones. But that was more compelling to me than looking at the incisors and even then I was at a meeting and I have to say I've been to a lot of meetings where it's the general public. Like, remember, Shawn, you came out to the Long Beach meeting we had on a Saturday morning, and there would be questions like, but why we are descendants from gorillas? people would say, and they eat basically plants. And I happened to be at a meeting with Steve Finney, and I went back and said, I got this question about, and he said, a lot can happen in a million years, so, you just look at the internal anatomy, and we don't have the intestinal contents like a gorilla. It's nowhere near the same. So anyway, but all of this is still requiring, I think, this community to get together, band together, to go to ownyourlabs.com if you haven't had labs done, and opt in as a research participant there. Talk about this with your doctor, follow with things that we know are important. And I think over time, the idea that a carnivore diet or a low-carb keto, which is carnivore-ish, what I teach, will win because we can fix things that other people can't. And it's going to gravitate, I think a new generation will gravitate toward what really works, not what's supposed to work. And that's when a paradigm shifts, they say, when there's a sufficient following, but then also the new paradigm's able to, take a picture with a phone. I mean, that who doesn't have one now, right? So if enough people are allowed to cut carbs out and their medical issues get better or resolve totally, that's the way this is going to gain in popularity, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we live in a different age. Even when Atkins was alive, I mean, the messaging was very curated, and now everybody has a voice. They can all share experience, and it travels at the speed of light. And we can, you don't have to look very far to see thousands and thousands of people getting obvious benefits. It's not when you can put up here I weighed 350 pounds, now I'm at 200 pounds. Here's my A1C before, here it is after. That's hard to dismiss. I want to there's a question in here that I wanted to see if you'll have an answer to. Some people go on ketogenic carnivore diets. They still struggle with weight loss, even though they're doing everything right dietarily. Where do you go from there? Do you fasting? I mean, what are the other levers you can pull when you have patients that, despite doing the right diet or what you think is the right diet, they're just still struggling?
Yeah. Well, and of course, in a clinical setting, we take the time to screen for medicines that might be a problem. There, even Flonase or other steroid nasal sprays can be an issue, and most people don't think of that as a medicine. So let's say we've screened for all those other things, and it really is that you're eating meat and you're not losing weight. Well, it's a truism, or it's called a tautology, that if you're going to be drawing upon your body fat and losing fat weight, you have to be eating less energy than you're using. It's a given. So it's about the calories, but don't count calories and don't use an approach that. But now that you're within I'm not counting calories anymore. We've even seen a few N of 1 studies where people eat, pure carnivore diets or close, and then they gain weight. But I mean, they had to eat twice as much as they normally needed, even compared to other kinds of diets. So in my experience, it's usually habit eating or enjoyment eating, or those who they call themselves gourmands, where they really love eating. And so you have to make a break. That's where you can institute behavioral tools like, how about intermittent fasting? How about eating once a day or twice a day? And so I'll sit down with someone and ask them to go through what they're eating throughout the day and come up with a personalized plan in order to get you to comfortably eat less, because you can't be losing weight unless you're eating less than you're burning. I mean, I wish that I at a recent meeting, I kind of used the metaphor of explaining where a baby comes from. And in my clinic, basically, I say the baby comes from the stork. Most people are happy with the idea that, yes, you got to eat less. And so I say, yeah, a low carb diet's a low calorie diet. You're eating less. Well, but then there comes the day when, but wait a sec, there's more to it, isn't there? And so, okay, it is about fat burning. And when you get to the level your kid is now saying, what goes on in the bedroom, basically, no, it isn't about calories. It's about fat burning, and that you eat less as a result of fat burning. But not everyone's ready for that kind of discussion. And yet on the internet, it's like you can't win because everyone wants all three of these, and they all want it at the same time when they're not ready to hear that actually it's not about calories, it's about fat burning. And so that's at the level of Gary Taubes and David Ludwig, even bringing together people to write papers about this. But at the end of the day, come up with a behavioral tool that you can learn to eat less comfortably would be my really kind of looping back. That's a tough question or a tough discussion for some people who just kind of in there, no, it can't be calories, it can't be. And then I'll bring in crazy things like reality shows where people go out in the middle of nowhere and they lose a pound or two per day. I mean, you can see this in front of you. So it is about how much you eat. It's just you don't have to count the calories. And for a lot of people, the simplicity of sticking to animal source products is kind of a relief. They don't have to worry too much about other things. I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it comes down and the calories thing is, we can't necessarily accurately count what we're consuming. We can't necessarily know exactly what we're absorbing. We can't control our body heat, our heart rate, things like that, which can shift in response to the diets. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, there's laws of physics that we can't get around. As far as, we've got this Make America Healthy Again has now reached the national maybe the worldwide consciousness. Are you hopeful that that's going to lead to more of this lifestyle-based medicine, if you will, or do you think it's going to be co-opted by we need better drugs, quicker drugs, faster drugs, more available drugs? What is your thought on how that's going to play out?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the influx of new, fresh thinking, outcomes-based people would be huge. I mean, if you required the government to, say, do a study that says your guideline will reverse diabetes, and you make them do that, that would be a great thing. The messaging should go away from low fat, saturated fat being bad. The researchers have always, in the last 10 years, I've always said, don't worry about saturated fat as the target. Don't worry. So I'd love to see messaging change away from fat is bad to sugar and carbs have to be limited. And it would be interesting. Some countries tax sugar to, the messaging for the diabetes should be that it's sugar diabetes. Diabetes is a problem of elevated blood sugar, blood glucose, just targeting. I've seen that since in our lifetime, people used to call it sugar diabetes, where I got the sugar. And now you talk to someone, well, it's an insulin deficiency. No, not type 2 diabetes. So, whether a government with its unwieldy bureaucracy and all this can change on a dime, and I'm an optimist. I'm hopeful, and yet it hasn't changed in a long time. Fortunately, I think the guideline is so watered down that it's hard for the average consumer to know what it means, but it still influences institutions and hospitals and places where our patients hospitalized with type 2 diabetes should not be given pancakes and sugary syrup in the hospital. I mean, this just makes no sense.
Yeah, in the school system as well. Eric, we're unfortunately running out of time here. Where do folks go to find out more about you? I know you got a YouTube channel now. I know you got the ADAPT program. What are the things people can do to find out more about your stuff?
Well, being hamstrung in a clinic means I can only see so many people at Duke. And so we created a company called Adapt Your Life. Adapt Your Life has a YouTube channel. You could look at Dr. Eric Westman on YouTube, and I give my latest thoughts there. But we also teach people online at adaptyourlifeacademy.com. And so we teach people how to do keto diets, how to reverse diabetes, how to do all sorts of wonderful things with just food. And so please check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.
All right. Well, Eric, as usual, wonderful. Thank you for, like I said, doing what you've been doing for years and being a source of inspiration and education. Thank you.
Oh, and thank you too. Really appreciate it, Shawn.